All right, so welcome to the March segment of trauma-informed care reflection for refugee and migration services on Team Global Hope at UCC National. My name is Irene Willis Hassan, and I am the Minister for Refugee and Migration Services. And I appreciate you taking the time to come. And if you're watching this recording later, we appreciate you doing all the work that you are doing with immigrants and refugees. So to start off, just a couple housekeeping notes. Like I said, this is a live Zoom meeting, so please keep your microphone muted if you are not currently speaking. And next month, we're going to switch into doing this webinar format just for the smoothness of the ability to do this work. So I want to create a good container for what we're doing today and remind you that, as always, this space is for education and reflection. It's meant to gain insight and provide tools to engage our ministries responsibly and fully. Our time together is purposely not for nuts and bolts. We're not going to be discussing the mechanics of how to organize the stuff around getting a family resettled in the United States. Instead, this is an educational exercise in best practices of engagement for vulnerable populations, and it includes a short guided meditation. Now, although this session is being recorded, the recording will only focus on me, as I mentioned, as you walk through the meditation after the presentation. So your privacy will be maintained should you choose to participate. If you are interested in taking leadership around organizing your community to welcome immigrants, my colleague, the Reverend Noel Anderson of Church World Services, I'm in trouble talking tonight. The Reverend Noel Anderson of Church World Service, and also the leader of the UCC National Collaboration on Immigration, has a separate meeting that we do monthly, which is more of a nuts and bolts roundtable of leadership around the conference. Please feel free to email me if you are interested in that meeting, or if you're interested in learning more about how to sponsor a family if you are not currently doing so. So now, let us enter into a space of intentionality, listening, and willingness to learn, grow, and become fully present with our ministries. We open up today with a scripture reading from Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Giving to the needy. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues, on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. This is the word of God. So I always open up with a short devotional about times that I've spent with vulnerable populations in reflection to the scriptures used around the topic. So today's story is so I was the employment manager for a refugee resettlement office in Seattle for a while. So it was my job to help refugees find jobs. And if you watch the boundary training that we did a couple weeks ago, finding jobs is paramount. And I had this young man. He was 20 years old, and he was from Syria. And he had this incredible resume that he brought with him from Syria that said that he was a software developer and he had all these cool skills. And I was like, awesome. This guy is going to make me look really good, because most of the work that I did was actually resettling or putting refugees in jobs that were menial, getting them jobs being a housekeepers or security guards, other things that they didn't really want to do. So when I got, first of all, Syrians were a hot topic back then in 2016. They were the refugee that everyone wanted to work with at that time, and the fact that he had these really unique good skills, and he was a good-looking young man, I thought that this could be my star player. So I took his amazing resume and I sent it to Zillow, which is a big company that is based out of Seattle where I was working. And Zillow immediately grabbed it and said they wanted to interview. And I was so excited because I finally got to I finally got to put a refugee into a job situation that would really have some pizzazz and some wow. So we get to the interview, me and this young man, and he is just sweating. I said, "It's okay. Your English is good. You know what you're talking about. You're going to kill it. And this is going to be a great job for you." But then we sit down with the interviewer, and she starts asking him all these technical questions about computers and stuff that I don't understand. But unfortunately, he didn't understand it either. His entire resume was a lie. He had fabricated it for the exact same reason that I was attracted to it, that he wanted to feel powerful and important. And so he left the interview totally embarrassed. The interviewer was totally embarrassed. I was totally embarrassed. So what went wrong here? What went wrong here is exactly what Matthew chapter 6 talks about, is that I made that situation about me. For me, this was my star player. This was my star Syrian refugee with a star job, and it was going to make me look really good and awesome to resettle this guy. So when you make giving about you, it embarrasses all the people around you and hurts them worse. This kid, I could not find him a job for the longest time after that because it ruined his self-esteem. Because instead of prepping him, instead of being present with who he was and learning more about him, I simply went to what was best for me. And if I would have spent more time getting to know this young man and learning about why he would create a fictional resume, I would have been able to place him more appropriately in a good job and make him feel safe and welcomed in the United States instead of having his first experience be one of embarrassment. And for me, that's a perfect example of toxic charity, of giving to the needy for your own well-being. And so that is what we're going to reflect on today, is the topic of toxic charity when what we do to help actually hurts. And that's the example that I provide for you today as we begin to reflect. So now it's my pleasure to introduce to you MacArthur Flournoy, who serves as the chaplain for the Institute for Human Services Hawaii, which is Hawaii's oldest and largest homeless service system. MacArthur is a national human and civil rights leader who has a long-standing history working for and with vulnerable populations. As a writer, organizer, and leader, his expertise is in social justice program administration, LGBTQ equality, racial justice, civil rights, HIV/AIDS, and religion and faith. MacArthur is also a UCC member, and we are proud to have him as one of our chaplains. Welcome, Chaplain MacArthur.
What a joy and what an honor it is to be with you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you this evening. And I want to acknowledge someone very special who's part of this broadcast. Is Ellen Godby Carson, who's on this Zoom platform with us. And she is a real content expert on this subject and has been championing this conversation for some time. And so without putting Ellen on the spot any more than I already have, Ellen, I do want to invite you at the end to offer any additional thoughts because you have such a grasp on this material. That said, I guess we can jump right off into our PowerPoint if that's all right. So we go to slide 2, please. I thought this was a really powerful quote, and it comes from one of the authors. But it's from a French philosopher, and it just reads there: almsgiving is a perversion of giving. It affirms the superiority of the giver, who thus gains a point on the recipient, binds them, demands gratitude, humiliates them, and reduces them to a lower state than they had before. I don't believe that this is the intention of anyone ever setting out to do social justice work. Neither do I believe that in the work of charity and doing the work of social justice, that it is the intention to assert one superiority over the other. But an unintended consequence of not doing the real work of understanding who it is we hope to serve, with whom we should be partnering, and what it is we want to see in terms of outcomes will leave us with a perversion of giving without actually achieving the intended goal. Next slide, please. So what is toxic charity? You know, there's a lot of literature out there, and I went through just an entire, what I almost felt like a ream of paper until I had to pare it back and really come down to what I consider the essential components. And so what I want to offer you is that toxic charity is a system of giving that denigrates the intended recipient to the status of one completely devoid of any capacity to transform their own lives. Essentially, recognizing or believing that the person that you're serving has no God-given ability, no agency, no power to transform their communities or their lives. It is paternalistic. It's androcentric, focused on men, and that it places ultimate value on systems of dominance that eschew power sharing with anyone other than heterosexual males, to the exclusion of women, girls, and female identified persons. You know, on International Women's Day today, I find this interesting that we're talking about toxic charity. A lot of the organizations that are out there are headed by men. And it's no surprise to me that what we've seen, you know, over the last perhaps 70 years has been systems of giving that started out with, well, I'm saying they had charitable objectives and they had great intentions, but the outcome of their efforts resulted in systems that left people without resources or without even addressing the goal that they were intending to achieve. In the beginning, I think about HIV and AIDS, or as I think about the communities that I served in terms of substance abuse treatment. In the beginning, one model of treatment that I had when I was working as a substance abuse counselor, and it was for women and children. And for whatever reason, the researchers at University of Southern California said that we're going to focus on women and children to the exclusion of their male partners. So as we did more of the work around chemical dependency, what we came to find out is that we were touching on a whole plethora of issues. And this is something that I wanted to speak to, that I think is important for us to understand, that in an intention, with an intention to address one particular point, we often find ourselves unearthing other issues. If you want to take a note, is that by a woman named Kimberly Crenshaw, who talks about intersectionality and how these issues are often connected and related one to another. I also think that when we talk about toxic charity, it is ethnocentric. It primarily places primary value on Eurocentric thinking and approaches while ignoring the beloved community comprised of all people from varying cultures, ethnicities, places of origin. Lastly, it lacks any strategic forethought. And if we really want to talk about bringing about transformative change, it's going to require some real risk taking. Next slide, please. I will show you something. Toxic charity is easier than social justice. I want to say that again. Toxic charity is easier than social justice because we can keep systems of power in place and we don't have to take the risk of making ourselves available to the people that we choose to serve, other than we are the givers and they in turn are the receivers. We know this all too well, particularly being members of the United Church of Christ. You know, what has God told you? I meant to change. He, to God, has told you, O mortal, what is good and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly. I see these as the values of the work that we hope to accomplish together. Next slide, please. This comes from Robert Lupton. Toxic Charity, How Churches and Charities Hurt Those They Serve and How to Reverse It. He lays out 4 bullets for us. One is feed a person once, it elicits appreciation. Feed them twice, it creates anticipation. Feed them 3 times, it creates expectation. 4 times, it becomes an entitlement. You could read it for yourself there. I guess the goal is, what are we really hoping to accomplish? What is it that we're really trying to do here? The only effective charity is the kind that asks more from those that being served rather than less. It is not unloving to expect those to do their part, just the opposite. It is cruel to send a message that a person has nothing of worth to offer. Being needed is the ultimate affirmation of human worth. It creates personal relationships, and this is something that I'm going to continue to come back to, is the whole notion of relationship. Toxic charity doesn't look at relationship. Toxic charity look at inputs. This is how many meals we give away. This is how many people we house. This is how many sets of clothing we give away to those who are not clothed. None of those things in and of themselves are bad or inherently wrong or evil. But when we do those things to the exclusion of understanding who we are and what we have to offer, can allow us to move into a realm that we are not only unsuccessful, but we're burned out and we're overwrought. The last bullet is never do for the materially poor what they have or could have the capacity to do for themselves. Strive to empower materially poor people through employment, lending, and investing, not through one-way giving. You know, coming up in South Central Los Angeles in a crime-ridden area, you know, I had the idea that I wanted to serve people. I wanted to help communities. And in the beginning, it was very much about charity. You know, you give away, you give away, you give away. Next slide, please. But over the course of my career, what I've come to understand is that there is something that is so incredibly powerful about when communities come together. There's something incredibly powerful when we partner with people that we hope to serve. I'm not going to read to you, but you know, the key point that I want to make here is that when we aim or when we hope to alleviate social injustice, that it is imperative that we partner with those we hope to serve. I want to take it a step further and say it's equally imperative that we partner with others that are doing the work in our respective communities. I think about faith-based organizations, churches, you know, synagogues, temples, what have you. And I think about the fact that we often may find ourselves being the catalyst for change. But as we do this work, as we move into relational organizing, we may discover that we may not be the best person to lead the work. We have the idea, we have the vision from God, we have this thought, this project that has been dropped in our spirit. But as we do this work outside the realm of toxic charity, we discover that there is so much more to be learned and that there are many more that are able to do this with us, such that we don't burn ourselves out. Next slide, please. I love Lilla Watson's. She's an Aboriginal community organizer. She's a visual artist. But she says, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And so, next slide, please. There is something that I think that has to be talked about, and that is that the antidote to toxic charity really is relational organizing. We can be transactional or we can be relational. And I don't mean to place those in two direct or diametrically opposed camps. We may find that that we have to, for the purposes of our funders, we need to count, we need to be able to quantify, we need to be able to talk about what are the objectives that we've accomplished together. But the nexus of our work, the economy of doing social justice work, in the way that has been laid out for us biblically, is that through the economy of relationships. We can do more through partnerships than we can in and of ourselves. And that's why it's critically important that we forge relationships that are, and allow us to reach out into other communities to serve people that we believe that we have a vision to serve, but also practicing some humility that is laid out for us in Micah 6:8, that recognize we may not be the key thought leader in the room. There are others that are available to partner with us. We look at relational organizing requires vulnerability, authenticity, and risk-taking. Transactionalism focuses primarily on input, the number of things given away. Relationships focus on the person in their given context. You know, one of the things that I know about ministry, particularly in terms of serving folks on the edge, is that it's very easy to feel overwhelmed. It's very easy to feel as though you're not making the change that you want to see. But when we place ourselves into relationship with people, something transformative happens. And I could tell you this from my days when I worked for the Human Rights Campaign for 6 years. And I was responsible for leading the faith component and mobilizing people of faith for marriage equality before it was declared the law of the land by the United States Supreme Court. And initially, when I arrived at the Human Rights Campaign, I should say that one of the main points of resistance in the 11 years they tried to get marriage equality passed in the state of Maryland, they had been blocked 11 times. It had been a contingent of conservative African-American pastors. And they were the primary people that opposed it. And so they brought me in and they wanted me to organize them and to, form coalitions and to try to get them on board. And one of the things that I had to do was establish an individual meeting with each pastor. And I had to listen to how the Human Rights Campaign had not made themselves available to these pastors in any other way other than asking these pastors to get on board with the Human Rights Campaign political agenda. But as the pastor said to me, we've never heard the Human Rights Campaign say, let's talk about unemployability. Let's talk about racial justice. Let's talk about sentencing disparities. Let's talk about unemployment within our community. And when I took that back to the organization, I will never forget sitting in a management team meeting and talked about, of all the things that we want to do, the thing that I've heard most consistently from African-American pastors that have been opposing us is that we need to take on the notion of racial justice. The head of the legal department told me at that time that that would be mission drift. That if we were to take on racial justice, somehow that would be alien and foreign to our goal of passing marriage equality. But that is a classic example of a way that organizations can position themselves to focus solely on our agenda, their agenda, without having any compassion or any empathy for those we hope to serve, those we hope to attract, those we hope to help get on board with us to support our agenda. Next slide, please. Resilient engagement. And this is what I want to come to, is that there is a way that we can engage people to do the work of social justice that allows for us to not only share power, but understand what resources are available. Robert Lupton and the others that I identify in the bibliography at the end of this presentation all speak to this same issue, is that we have to be willing to get out of ourselves. We have to be willing, particularly within the faith context. But I want to take it a step further. First, I'll say everyone, no matter how impaired or down on their luck, has a talent, a capability, or a strength to bring to the table. To overlook those talents, to offer pity instead of opportunity, is to diminish rather than empower. The only effective charity is the kind that asks more from those being served rather than less. Asking for more sends an affirming message to the recipient that he or she also has something of value to offer. It is not unloving to expect people to do their part. Just the opposite. It is cruel to send a message that a person has nothing of worth to offer. Next slide, please. This was simply offered in one of Robert Lupton's presentations. He says, feed a person once, it elicits appreciation. Feed them twice, it creates anticipation. Feed him 3 times, it creates expectation. Feed him 4 times, it becomes an entitlement. Feed him 5 times, it produces dependency. As Irena said, I serve as the chaplain for the Institute for Human Services, and we serve homeless people. And I've noticed something. I happen to work at the men's shelter, although I am responsible to serve everyone in our communities, but I've just observed the men's shelter because that's where I'm based more often than not. And my observation is those men that remain in the shelter longer have a lower chance of being housed and a higher chance of recidivism. the longer they stay in the shelter, the longer they are solely looked at as recipients, the greater the degree of entitlement that I see, and definitely the greater degree of dependency. But when we engage them from as soon as they come in and try to get a sense of where have you been? How did you get in this situation? And how can we partner to get you out of this situation? It takes on a whole new tone. It takes on a whole new excitement, because then they have agency. Then they have power. Then they're told, you have the power to affect change in your life. And we want to work with you and partner with you to bring about that in. Next slide, please. Transformative justice. And I think this is what this is really about. It really, if we're going to do something that endures, if we're going to do something that lasts, if we're going to do something that has meaning and has purpose and has vitality, then I want to suggest to you that we, as who are called by God to be of service, that there is with us, in us, there is a need for us to go through a process of metamorphosis as we do this work. If we are not ignited, and by that I mean if we are not fired up, if we are not renewed in some way, if we are not shaken in some way, if we are not in our very core ask deeper questions about who we are in relation to God and to the world, my experience has been those kind of efforts rarely lead to transformative justice. Those efforts leave people feeling burnt out, leave people feeling left out. Oftentimes it leaves people with the feeling of, I don't think I want to do that anymore. When I worked with those who were impacted by HIV and AIDS, my experience was that so many men and women were being shunned by society. The church, many churches in Los Angeles, where I lived at the time, and then in the Bay Area, Northern California, wouldn't even bury people who died of HIV related illnesses. Families would shun them. And unfortunately, churches, many churches, said that HIV/AIDS was the just due sentence for being LGBTQI. What we missed in that formula, or what changed, is when people with HIV realized that they had to take the position of leadership if they were going to live. I don't mind sharing with you that I'm also a man who's been living with HIV for 33 years. And I share this to make this point, that the moment that I learned that if I was going to live, I needed to participate in the ministry of my health. That brought about a cataclysmic change, because it caused me to call into question my theology. Was God the person that my pastor, who had taught me, introduced me to the Word of God, had said was HIV/AIDS just due a just sentence for being a member of the gay community? Or had he missed God somehow? And it was after that instance where I had to accept responsibility for my own health that I then called into question my theology. The point that I'm trying to make here is that as we do this work, it should be transformative, not just for those who are on the receiving end, but I even think, I'll say this even more, I think even more for those on the giving end. If I don't see myself differently, then at the end of an effort, at the end of a project, in the midst of a project, then I have to wonder what spiritual principles am I practicing in the performance of the work that I'm doing? Charity alone actually alienates. and ostracizes those we intend to serve when the service model is predicated solely on giving without addressing structural barriers. And I want to speak to that. Next slide, please. We should conduct a detailed assessment. And this is again from Lupton, who says that we should conduct a detailed assessment of our current benevolence portfolio. Is it yielding good returns? Is it consistent with our passions? Does it reflect our values about relief versus development? Is it invested on the cutting edge? Using the best practice, evidence-based systems designed for achieving the results we want. Next slide, please. I tried to get this whole presentation to do that. That's another topic. But so there it finally happened, but community development ministries. So community development ministries would be a model and approach to moving and doing the work of social justice that is antithetical to toxic charity. It takes into consideration what are the local assets of our clients, or if we don't want to say clients, of our guests, of our consumers, of those we hope to serve. Producers, skills, abilities, dreams, connections. See the world as our clients see their world, and build plans and opportunities from this perspective. 2, what are the assets of this place? Identify data regarding local associations, resources, physical assets, businesses, local methods of exchange. And 3, what's happening in the local, national, and international markets? What are the market opportunities? Formulate strategies based on market data that respond to local resources. You know, I'm going to go back to those African-American pastors who opposed us for 11 years. In the following year, after I arrived, we got a tentative passage of the bill on the state level. And it was going to come up for a full vote. And I was very wary of my pastors, my African-American pastors. And so by then, I had been walking with them for about a year. We had a big meeting to have an internal vote amongst them. Could they take a supportive role on the legislation, the proposed legislation, or could they even go so far as to take a non-aggression role? Not only did they agree to support the legislation, they brought out all of their churches, and these are big mega churches in Maryland, who showed up at the polls to support us. It was I believe that came about as a result of the Human Rights Campaign developing within its organization the capacity to address the work of faith. And then it required us to get into the community and to do groundwork for a year prior to the next vote. I actually think the 11 years prior to that was necessary in order for us to get marriage equality passed in the state of Maryland and eventually other states and ultimately passed in our nation. But here's the point that I want to make. Those who opposed this not only supported us, but expanded our base of support. But that came about as a result of us doing the necessary footwork to get them on board, to educate them, to dismiss and to interrupt stereotypes or mistaken beliefs. You know, the kind of foolishness that was out there around what marriage equality would bring about was just really crazy. And we had to just carefully dismantle those myths. And we were able to do that. But that came about as a result of us being willing to walk with people right where they were. Next slide. Community development principles to guide our work. Focus on community. Growth and transportation is best realized in the context of community, defined as both place and human relationship. Focus on assets. Identify and build existing community strengths and resources. This is actually from, I haven't noted in the back here. This is actually from Steve Corbett and Brian Finkert. Focus on front burner issues. important agendas of the community so as to be consistent with their priority and commitment. Focus on investing with the poor to create wealth generating opportunity. Focus on leadership development from within the community. Focus on pace, and this is so important. Focus on pace. Don't get ahead of the people. Don't take over the project. I'm sure we all have people that we work with at some time or another, and maybe we were a little transparent, maybe we were those people themselves who said, this is my ministry, and this is how things go in my ministry. I'm not talking about as a pastor, speaking as someone who's over an aspect of ministry. And we have to be careful and mindful that first and foremost, ministry is the work of God, that we are instruments, and there is a move and a pace and a rhythm and an unfolding by the way the Holy Spirit works, that it gives us direction. And we can lay out a strategic plan, and I believe that we should. We need to do formative evaluation, talking about what's here, just as it says, what are the assets? What are the liabilities? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are the threats to take into consideration? As we do all of that, ultimately, I believe that it's important that we place it right in the hands of God and says, lead us, guide us, and that we remain supple and flexible. Next slide. Final thoughts. This is such a huge point that I want to make. As you do this work, as you do the work of social justice, as you try to combat toxic charity that essentially locks people in place and says to people, look, you are where you are and you really have no chance of getting out of where you are. And for the rest of your life, you're going to be a recipient. You're going to be a recipient of some services that may or that may not be true. But I really believe that it's incumbent on every person that does this work to see the God-given agency within each and every human being. And what I want us to know, something straight from the gate, is that each and every one of us will make mistakes. Allow each lesson to transform us on the deepest level. I want to invite you to be gentle with yourselves and each other. Perhaps this is the most important thing that I'll say today, and I hope you can hear my heart on this. Anticipate the presence of God leading you in directions that may seem unexpected or drift in your mission. This may be the presence of the Holy One leading you into a new direction for the edification of giver and receiver. This is God's work. We're merely instruments seeking to bring about justice. Go together. Partner with key thought leaders within the community, from faith communities, government, academia, business, NGOs, CBOs, so on and so forth. Meaning that we must, and I really believe we must, as the church, be willing to bring people together. Be the convener. Be the convener. If, say for instance, you want to take on a homelessness project in your respective community, find out who's doing that work. Begin to have meetings as early as you can with members of those you hope to serve, as well as others who are serving them and other content leaders. You may find that, much like Mordecai, there are more with us than those that stand against us. Next slide, please. And this is where I want to leave it. As we talk about this work, as we look at this work, as we think about toxic charity, what is it that we're hoping to do? I believe is this: as we do the work of social justice, it is really to let people see their light. Free people, free people. One of my mentors often reminds me of that. Free people, free people. If you find yourself in a situation where people are not feeling liberated, the question I think we have to ask ourselves, why is that? And so I hope you don't mind if I just read this last poem by Marianne Williamson, because I think it offers us something to take into consideration again. It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us. Our deepest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we're powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightening about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our fear, our presence automatically liberates others. I want to leave you with a final thought, and it is this. Saturday before last, a 28-year-old man who was a client of ours was murdered. Another former client murdered him. His mother is the young man who was murdered. His mother is also with us in the women's shelter. She was devastated as I met with her last week and started doing grief work with her. And our community as a whole was devastated. On Friday afternoon at 1:00, we came together as a community. There were about 75 people in the room. And we talked about the epidemic of violence. We talked about at his memorial service what it's like to lose a life because of violence. But we also had to talk about homelessness. But what I want you to know is that the presence of God showed up in that room in such a way where there was such a peace, there was such presence, it was such comfort, there was hope and love and care that was shared to a woman who was grieving the loss of her son. Perhaps there is no grief greater than a parent who has lost their child. But as she left that place, she turned and she spoke to the entire room and said that she felt like she was lifted and supported and heard. Why am I saying this? I'm sharing this with you to say that even in the face of egregious loss, that we can bring about transformative change if we remain supple in the hands of God and attentive and attuned to the power of the Holy Spirit. Thank you.
Thank you, MacArthur. Thank you for sharing that presentation and also your powerful stories. And we appreciate the work that you do for the Institute for Human Services Hawaii. I also want to add that the part that you talked about with homeless services, in which the people that you immediately try to get back out of the shelter once they get in, this is true for refugee services as well. The reason why the refugee resettlement system says 6 months or less to get stable, I mean, in some ways that's just about capacity and getting people moved through. But the other reason is because if you stagnate, you stagnate. And so you see that a lot in refugee services as well. So keep that in mind, is the balance between compassion and growing with the family that you're serving, and also knowing that there is much expected of them. They can do it and you're there to support them. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and go into a very short reflection this week is very short, and then we will open it up for questions and conversations. So you're welcome to turn your camera off if you feel more comfortable, but I want to invite you into Lenten meditation as we are in the season of Lent. And that is that Lent begins in the wilderness. Even against our better judgment, we must begin these 40 days by going alone to a wild place in ourselves and in our lives. If we are fiercely honest with ourselves, we begin a Lenten journey towards greater openness. We must start by seeing things we would rather not see. And that's a quote by Sarah Parsons. So each day during Lent, I'm sure everyone has their practice that they are engaging in. But I encourage you, as partners in immigration ministries, to spend time in quiet solitude with intentionality of being present in the wilderness with the family you're hosting. Allow yourself to be invited into the wilderness that they are part of. Not there to fix it, but there just to recognize that you have intentionally entered that wilderness with them. If you don't already have a regular prayer time, you can begin this wilderness journey in your thoughts of being present with that liminal space for about 15 minutes a day. When you sit in your chosen solitary place, distractions will likely bombard you, and this is normal, and that's okay. So enter into the space where you're willing to be open into whatever the journey may bring you with the population you're serving. Again, not to fix it, not to change it, not to be the hero, but to be simply present with that moment. Identify the thoughts that enter your consciousness. Especially notice your fears and worries or anything that feels overwhelming or chaotic. These are the denizens of your hallowed wilderness. You may experience a feeling of being overworked, of being needed too much, of having no time for rest. You may become aware of the anxiety about relationships, a feeling that your interaction with the family you're hosting or the refugee services people or others are somehow out of balance. Be present with that feeling of imbalance. You may feel an emptiness, a sense that you have to do something. An element of wilderness exists in all these situations. These are the parts of ourselves that we tend to fight against. These are also the parts of ourselves that we begin to befriend, settling down and clearing more internal space. Allow the distracting thoughts to be part of your space, the anxiety, the imbalance. Notice that it's there and be okay with it. This is our Lenten journey. Note a few places in your meditations where you feel out of control, overwhelmed, or blocked, and list them in a journal that only you will see. In this way, you map out your own inner wilderness as it connects to the wilderness of the people you serve. And you can later decide how to focus it into your Lenten work and your journey with the family that you're serving. Okay, so if you would like a copy of that meditation, I can send the written format to you so that you can replicate it in your own setting. I encourage daily throughout the time of Lent. So at this time, we've got about 10 minutes left. I invite you into open discussion to ask questions of MacArthur or Ellen Carson, who again is on this call, and she's helped us develop this program before. Or any other questions or comments you may have. So the floor is yours, everybody.
Ellen, you mind if I ask if you had me? Oh, please go ahead.
Oh, sorry, should have raised my hand. Thank you so much to both of you on this topic. It's just such an important one. Do either of you have suggestions for helping churches who say that what they do is food pantry? They just want to give away food. That's what they've done. Their people are organized around that. Their people feel good about that. That's all they know how to do, or that's all they want to be doing. What's something that can help them move forward?
The question that comes up for me is to understand what is feeding about. You know, we know that people need to eat, that's a given. But is the area a food desert? You know, are there grocery stores in the area? I think one of the things to do is to look at the local area, look at the local community, and see if there are other churches. Are there other communities of faith that have recognized the same need and consider working together and looking at what can be done? Because I think one of the things that can be incredibly taxing to a church is to take on a ministry with the goal to do social justice work and find out that you have the same 3 volunteers that are showing up every single Saturday to do the work of probably what should be 15 people. So things that are done in coalition, in my experience, have a tendency to bring about more enduring outcomes than simply saying we're just going to go to our big kitchen and cook 150 meals. And again, I don't want to demonize that. I think that's incredibly important. But I do think there are other questions to consider. And I think we do far more when we work in partnership. Irene?
I would totally, that's almost verbatim what I was going to say is we've had a lot of churches over the course of this Afghanistan crisis say that what they want to do is give donations. And we definitely encourage donation giving, but done correctly. Because we had several churches that would do things like collect all these donations and they didn't have anywhere to put it. So then their church was just filled with donations. And so what I was encouraging those instances was to hook them up with other churches that did have capacity to sponsor and resettle and have other gifts such as advocacy. So combining gifts of churches working together so that the need is actually met instead of look at what I have done. I have all this stuff. Now I don't know what to do with it. Any other questions or comments? And yes, I see in the chat, I will send both MacArthur's slides and the meditation. Yeah, Melva, go ahead.
Our church hasn't started any project yet for the resettlement, but we have our own little group that's having a problem right now. So we're trying to resolve first the inner function of our church. But next door in our village is a Presbyterian church who already started a project for the Afghanistan resettlement. So what we're doing is we're announcing to the congregation that there is this program, and we're trying to partner with them in a simple way by supporting. Most of the time, people want to bring material things, but we have to remember that material things sometimes takes time to be shipped, to be sorted out, and are they really needed? What is more important, the way we look at it, is for us to send financial support, because the people who are already doing the resettlement project are aware of what they need. Somebody might say, oh, we need pots and pans. We send them tons of pots and pans that it's so overwhelming. But if we say these are the area we need, but our suggestion is for you to send some support, because 100% of the money you send goes to the project. And that helps people think, because whenever they send money, the first question they ask is how much goes to the administrative function of a group. In every area, I am working with the people-to-people project right now. Whenever we send out and register for the program, which is $25, 100% of that goes to the area, not to the UCC nor to the disciples, goes to the area, and it helps out. And people feel that right away by participating in the program, giving the registration fee, they're already helping. So maybe there is another area in our community that is already doing something, and we could just partner with them until we become fully equipped to do it on our own church. And right now it's really overwhelming because we're still here, we're waiting, we're doing project for Afghanistan, and we are already bombarded with requests for Ukraine. So this is where I like the idea when you mentioned we really have to focus on what we would do. When we are so overwhelmed, we feel we're not doing anything at all. And I like the idea of going to the wilderness, because that's the way I can only refuel myself.
Yeah, and so it's important for doing direct service work. Homeless services is a bit different from refugee services in that many of the folks that listen in on this call are hosting a family, which means they have made a financial and contractual obligation to actually work with people. In homeless services, you know, churches can pop in and out. They don't have the same kind of obligation. So, you know, I just encourage anyone who's working with a vulnerable population that they do the work of the wilderness, to be willing to be uncomfortable, to let go of what they think is best for them, and know that that person is a full agent autonomous being, because it has to be. Otherwise you're just helping them get more stuck, which is what MacArthur was trying to clarify, is be clear with yourself, be clear with them, so you're not contributing to getting them more stuck. Okay, so unfortunately that comes to the end of our time tonight, but we do appreciate all of you coming. And before we leave, next month we have Caitlin Roberson coming, who served as the Director of Major Gifts for Refugee Services of Texas, and she's going to be presenting on trauma-informed care in the refugee resettlement system. I look forward to seeing you there. And now, MacArthur, if you don't mind, do you mind giving us a blessing benediction to guide us out of our time together tonight?
Sure. Merciful and loving God, how generous you are to us with your time, your provision. We invite you to continue to drop into our spirits the work that you would have us to do for the furtherance of the gospel, that we might free people, that we might love people, that we might edify all people. Use us in your service and remind us of our humanity and our finiteness, and remind us that you are all-knowing and all-loving and all-giving, all-present. Help us to channel your love and to keep you at the forefront of all that we do. And we promise to give you the praise and you the glory. And thank you. In the precious name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening, and we'll see you tomorrow for the next part of our Ramadan series, Women in Islam.
Thank you so much. Take good care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.